You know that feeling when a brand you grew up with, a store that was always just there, suddenly disappears? It feels kind of personal, right? But what if it wasn't just bad luck? What if it wasn't just changing times? What if it was all part of a plan? Well, today, we're going to open up the financial playbook that has totally reshaped our economy, and it affects everything from the stores we shop at to the safety of our retirement.
I mean, just think about it for a second. Toys R Us, Sears, heck, even Red Lobster. These were absolute household names. They were a part of the cultural landscape. One minute they're there, and the next, poof, they're selling off everything. What in the world connects all these failures? It seems like a mystery, but believe me, there's a pattern here. And this is where it gets really interesting. When a guy like Warren Buffett, one of the most successful investors on the planet, raises a red flag, you really ought to pay attention. He's basically saying the way this whole industry counts its wins and losses, it's not exactly honest. It's a huge hint that the story we're being told about why these businesses fail, yeah, that's not the whole picture, not even close. So the common thread, the thing that links all these collapses, is a very specific set of financial moves. You can think of it like a playbook, one that's executed with, let's just say, ruthless efficiency. And we're about to break this playbook down, play by play, so you can see exactly how it works and what it leaves behind. All right, let's crack open this playbook. The very first move, the one that makes everything else that follows possible, is something called the leveraged buyout. You'll hear it called an LBO. It's an incredibly powerful and, frankly, a super controversial way to take control of a company. So what exactly is an LBO? Okay, imagine this. You want to buy $1 million house, but instead of saving up, you get a gigantic mortgage, putting down almost none of your own money. Then, and here's the crazy part, you force the house itself to somehow make the mortgage payments. That's pretty much an LBO. A private equity firm uses a ton of borrowed money to buy a company and then saddles that same company with paying back all the debt. Let's walk through it. First, the private equity or PE firm doesn't go after a failing business. No, they target a healthy one, a company with good, steady cash flow. Then they borrow an absolutely staggering amount of money, sometimes putting up as little as 1% of their own cash. Finally, and this is the absolute key, that whole mountain of new debt gets dropped right onto the company's books. The business is suddenly drowning in debt it never asked for. And what's the result of loading up a perfectly good company with this much debt? The data is just stark. Companies bought through leveraged buyouts are 10 times more likely to go bankrupt. Let that sink in. 10 times. This isn't some unfortunate side effect. It's practically a feature of the game they're playing. So the company has new owners, and it's buried in debt. You'd think the goal would be to, grow the business, to pay it all off, right? Nope. That is not play number 2. The very next move is to pull out as much cash as you can, as fast as you can. And to see how this works, Red Lobster is the perfect, if tragic, example. Back in 2014, it was bought in a leveraged buyout. What happened next is basically a masterclass in this idea of value extraction. So the first tactic they used is called a sale-leaseback. This is where the PE firm makes the company sell off its own valuable assets. In this case, all the land and buildings its restaurants were on. It's like selling your car for a quick pile of cash, but now you have to pay a crazy rental fee every single day just to drive it. You get one big payday, but you're stuck with a permanent, crippling expense. Now, check this out. The before and after is just wow. Before the buyout, Red Lobster owned its properties. That's a huge asset. But after, the PE firm forced it to sell more than 500 of its locations for $1.5 billion. That cash went straight to the new owners, while Red Lobster got stuck with a gigantic new bill, rent that shot up to almost $200 million a year. It lost control of its own future, locking it into a financial death spiral. But they weren't done pulling cash out. The next play is called a dividend recapitalization. And this one is almost unbelievable. The PE firm forces the company to take on even more debt, not to build new restaurants, not to improve the menu, but just to pay a giant cash dividend directly to themselves. They get their initial investment back, and then some, while the company just sinks deeper and deeper into debt. So at this point, the company has had its assets sold off, and it's suffocating under all this debt. How on earth does it make those massive interest payments? Well, there's only one way left. You start slashing costs. You gut the business from the inside out. And this is where we, as customers and employees, really start to feel it. To pay for that debt, the cuts begin. You see massive layoffs. The people who are lucky enough to keep their jobs see their wages and benefits get cut. The quality of the product gets worse because they're using cheaper stuff and they've slashed the research budget. And that super frustratingly long wait time when you call customer service, yeah, that's not a mistake. That's a line item on a spreadsheet, a cost that got squeezed.
And listen, this isn't just a hunch or a few bad stories. The actual numbers back this all up. A big study in 2019 found that, on average, companies owned by private equity firms lost 4.4% more jobs after being bought compared to similar companies. And this chart just spells it out perfectly. While similar companies were basically holding steady on jobs, getting bought by a PE firm directly correlated with a big drop in employment. For thousands and thousands of workers, this playbook ends with a pink slip. And this brings us to the final and often the most devastating act of the entire playbook. After all the cash has been pulled out, after the business has been squeezed totally dry, what's left? This is where we see the real wreckage. And you have to understand, this is not just a story about retail stores. This exact same playbook has been run on local newspapers, completely gutting newsrooms. It's been used on funeral homes. And what's really alarming is it's now being used more and more in critical sectors like housing and even healthcare, often with absolutely devastating consequences.
Just look at this. This is the graveyard of companies hollowed out by this playbook. Toys R Us, bankruptcy. 31,000 people out of a job. Red Lobster, bankruptcy. Sears, a slow, painful public collapse. 99-cents only stores, gone. Every single one liquidated. And Steward Healthcare, the collapse of an entire hospital system. These aren't just one-off failures. They're casualties of a very clear pattern. And this right here, this is the most critical and maybe the most disturbing part of the entire thing. Remember all those fees and cash dividends they paid themselves at the beginning? Because the PE firm already pulled its profit out, it can walk away with hundreds of millions of dollars even when the company it bought goes bankrupt. The firm gets paid first, and they leave the employees, the suppliers, and the whole community to deal with the mess.
Which brings us to our final question. The whole playbook is designed to shift all the risk away from the investors and dump it onto the company, its workers, its suppliers, sometimes even us, the taxpayers. So when you have a system that is literally designed to privatize the profits while socializing the losses, who's really playing the game and who is just getting played?